Today we have Jack with us, Jack Wolfe. I'm sure everyone here knows Jack. He's part of the AR/VR community, and Jack is an educational technologist at the BU Medical Campus IT EdTech team. He provides individualized training, admin support, and professional development to Boston University faculty, students, and staff at the Med Campus. He also has professional experience as a graphic designer. He is a 3D animator and an independent video game developer. Now, one of his big areas of interest has been how extended reality can create these immersive type of educational experiences. And he's facilitated some hands-on VR demos in classrooms and conferences. And today he's very excited to talk to us about how artificial intelligence can interface with these extended reality experiences in new and exciting ways. So with that said, I am going to turn this over to Jack and let him get started.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So welcome everybody. Hi, thank you for that introduction. The title of this presentation is Image Generation and AI's Role in Shaping Extended Reality Experiences. As you may have heard from other speakers, extended reality is kind of an umbrella term that includes augmented and virtual reality or mixed reality. So really interested to show you both image generation for 2D images as well as 3D experiences that are kind of more immersive. It's been crazy working on this presentation because I have to keep updating slides as I'm saying, oh, that just came out, or that's better than the old one that I had. So really a very, very fast moving, probably the fastest moving time I've ever seen in technology. So get started here with my background. I got a degree in computer art in 2008 from Syracuse University, doing, as was mentioned in my intro, 3D modeling, 3D animation, using the Unity game engine to work on collaborative video game projects, other stuff that I'm interested in, photo, video, audio production. I'm also a musician. And then digital fabrication is really interesting because I can take these 3D models and I can actually make 3D printed versions of them, or I can take 2D designs and I can laser engrave or etch them. So always really interested to use these different technologies. For a period of time, I worked for the Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary as the lead animator on the Cataract Master Trainer, which was a grant-funded project for virtual cataract surgery. I actually animated over 900 animations of different steps involved with cataract surgery in a kind of virtual pathway, which was a kind of like a choose your own adventure. You click a button to determine what you're going to do during surgery, and you either were successful or unsuccessful. And it also included kind of video interviews with different experts in cataract surgery as to why you made the correct or incorrect choice. So that was kind of one of the more interesting projects I worked on. And then in addition to my current role, some experience at other higher educational institutions at Wellesley College, working with the art department and library and technology services. And then also on the College of Charleston teaching and learning team, again, being a liaison with the School of the Arts. So now my role is in BUMC-IT Educational Technology on the BU Medical Campus. Wait, where's that picture taken? That looks kind of familiar, but I don't recognize that building. That's because this building does not exist. This building was created by Adobe Firefly, which is a generative AI tool. It's currently in beta, but I can actually confirm that at bu.edu accounts now have access to this tool at firefly.adobe.com. You can see here the prompt that I used to generate this image, Boston University Medical Campus, and the content type, which was a photo, which is something that they're doing with this tool, content type styles that you can use to further influence these images. So you've probably heard of or seen a lot of these different tools here. These are some examples. We've got OpenAI has something called DALL-E, Stability.ai has Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, and then Adobe Firefly. And important to note that some of these are free, like Stable Diffusion and Firefly is free for now, but some are paid. And that interesting thing too about this slide is these are kind of some of the heavy hitters in this space. And all three of these top companies are only really a maximum about 5 or 6 years old. So they're really, really new companies and new services, except for Adobe, which was founded in 1987. And the first commercial version of Photoshop came out in 1990. And thank you, Dan. Yes, this is part of the Photoshop beta as well. So, Adobe is really the only established player in this space, although I've also heard that Facebook is looking to come out with a new tool, and certainly with their data set of millions and billions of photos and images, who knows what you could create with a tool like that. So you might be asking, how do these tools work? I am not a computer graphics researcher or a computer scientist. So even when I'm trying to understand how these tools work, it's difficult on a technical level. But as a kind of higher overview, there's two main ones. The more common one would probably be the diffusion model, which transforms noise into data by applying a series of diffusion steps, essentially turning images into noise and then taking them from noise and turning them back into images. And that's kind of how the model works generally. The other one, which you may have heard of or seen, are generative adversarial networks, or GANs, which involve two kind of systems fighting against each other. One is the generator, which is trying to synthesize new data, and the discriminator that's trying to tell, okay, which is a real image and which is a synthesized image. The pros of the GANs is they can generate realistic and detailed samples, and they're more efficient, but you really have less control over the image. They can suffer from something called mode collapse. And also just generally GANs seem to have to be trained on a more smaller specific data set, versus diffusion models seem to be more like generalized. You can use stable diffusion to generate any kind of image, as opposed to just like faces or cars or buildings. Generally, that seems to be the case. Diffusion models also, like I said, offer a higher level of control, but they are more computationally intensive, and it does take longer to train them. There's a link down here at the bottom if you want to learn more about this. Again, I'm still trying to understand this. And then again, these two images come from the links. I mentioned GANs have these two, the generator and the discriminator, that are kind of working against each other. And I saw a video that described the diffusion model in a kind of interesting way. When you drop a food coloring into a glass of water, when you first drop it, it's kind of like bunched up and swirling at the top, and then it diffuses into the water, and then the water changes color. So that's almost akin to this process of taking an image and converting it into Gaussian or random noise, and then trying to take that, but the difference is it's trying to take that noise and then turn it back into an image. So it's, taking text and figuring out what text is associated with what images. So again, this is something that I'm way out of my element, but I'd love to learn more about this and see more videos about how this actually works. This is kind of just how I've seen these explained. The great thing is you don't actually have to know exactly how these work to start using these tools. So this is a text to image tool. So you provide a prompt like student at Boston University, or Edward J. Media fixing an AV system, which is an image created by my colleague Scott. And it also gives you the ability to add styles. So you could say this is a photo, or in the image on the right, this is a steampunk style. So you can see some of the technologies there are influenced by that. And I think that these photos both highlight kind of some of the pros and cons of this tool. As an overall image with single people or small groups of people, it can work really well. But when you focus on some of the details, like the kind of weird CRT machine on the right, the individual details don't really look like anything. But as a whole image, it looks like something. And similarly with the student, if you look at the collar or details in the backpack or the background, there are little things that don't look quite right. But these models are continuing to advance and advance so quickly that even those little weird details can be kind of ironed out. And again, each model Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or Firefly is going to look completely different. And even within those models, there are different models. So really a very, very advanced tool that keeps getting better and better. And a useful skill that you've probably heard discussed in the media in relation to ChatGPT is called prompt engineering. And this is a whole kind of thing for typing in what kind of prompt do you provide and how do you craft a good prompt in order to generate the type of image you want. And you actually have to kind of tailor this to the specific model that you're using. With Adobe Firefly, you should not use artist names or branded words because Firefly was only trained on Adobe's commercially licensed stock photos and royalty-free images. So you could go into Midjourney and say, I want to see Spider-Man in the style of, this famous artist, and it will generate Spider-Man, but it will not do that for Firefly. So you can't use those kinds of words. The other thing you can do is you could actually look at the stock.adobe.com photos and see, okay, if these are the images it was trained from, then what titles do they have and what tags do they have? And I can actually use those in my prompts, and you'll get much closer and maybe more realistic results. There's a gallery online where you can view other images that were created from inspiration. There's a sidebar, like I mentioned, you can specify content type, style, color, and tone. You've seen some of these already, and I'll show you some other images that use these. And then there's this reference image feature that I just used the other day where you can actually typically you generate like 4 variations. You could select one variation and say, okay, I like this. Use this image to generate the next batch of images. And then there's a slider where you can say, I want this to be more like the image I created or more like this new prompt that I typed in. So it's very well designed. And I think getting Adobe's, huge infrastructure of artists and designers and testing, it's really a much more user-friendly tool. And some of these other AI generators are much more difficult, especially if you want to install them on your own computer and you're installing like dependencies and stuff. It's a lot more tech work to get that set up versus just using a website. Touching upon yes, and a great thing about the copyright guardrails, I'll touch on that a little bit. So because it's not trained on, commercially available images, you can get it's difficult if you want to generate something that looks like a recognizable image. You have to use this kind of prompt engineering. So as an example here, I started with, okay, a woman with long dark hair. That starts off, but that doesn't really, I don't know how good that looks as an image, and that's not really what I want. So I refined it by adding some details. Italian woman with long dark hair, Renaissance style, looking at the camera, and then I added at the end landscape in the background. And you can see I'm kind of getting closer to the Mona Lisa, right? Versus if I just typed in the Mona Lisa, it was probably not going to give me anything. You type the Mona Lisa into Stable Diffusion and Midjourney, and you'll probably just get much closer to the Mona Lisa. But again, this brings up this question of copyright where, it's being trained on other artists' work without their permission. Oftentimes watermarks are showing up in the generated images versus Adobe cannot take that kind of legal liability. So they're saying, we already have these millions of stock photos. We're going to train it on this. And you using Adobe Firefly you're yourself training the model and adding to it. So it's really interesting to see stuff that kind of looks like something recognizable, but is still a little different, right? And I'm sure with more tuning and tweaking, I could get it even closer to the Mona Lisa. So now I'd like to play kind of a fun game with you all, and it's called Guess That Prompt. So I'm going to show you an image, and I want you to try to guess what the prompt is. Again, knowing that it was not trained on the copyrightable materials behind this image. So I'm going to start you off with a really easy one. Feel free to throw it in the chat or unmute yourself if you like. What is this movie? Should all know this one, right? The Matrix, of course. So we've got Brigitte, my apologies if I said your name incorrectly. You got this one right. So my favorite movie, it's actually from the shooting script by the Wachowskis. Neo looks out, now able to see through the curtain of the Matrix. For a moment, the walls, the floor, even the agents become a rushing stream of code. This is towards the end of the movie where he actually sees the Matrix. And even though this, is very, I think, good in terms of close to what happened in the movie, there are probably a lot of royalty-free images where someone has made something like the Matrix. You've probably seen like hackers typing with like code projected on their face. So that's where this one comes from. All right, so the next one, this is a poem. Oh, yes, thanks, Andrew. Great exercise for alt text. Anybody recognize this poem? Notice, what does this look like here? Anybody? So I think I first read this one in like 9th or 10th grade. Any last guesses? Anybody? This poem is also my favorite episode of one of my favorite shows. It's called Ozymandias. Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Kind of the relics of a decaying empire. Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. A really great poem if you're not familiar with it. So I think you're seeing how you could use this kind of exercise to have students, let's say in a writing class, for example, write something and put into this kind of Adobe Firefly and generate a story, a visual representation. So just so many great uses for this kind of tool in education. The last one, I'm hoping people will have some good guesses for this one. This is a character. So anybody, like, important to note that this character, you may be noticing, yep, it does look like a dragon. Yep, Smaug is another guess. I'll give you one last hint. It's actually a dragon man. Anybody? There we go. Dan's got it. Dragon man, Trogdor the Burninator, a green dragon with an S-shaped body, angry eyebrows, a beefy muscle arm, breathing fire, and scales shaped like consummate V's in the style of Homestar Runner. Didn't quite get it. I don't see the beefy muscle arm or the consummate V's, but Homestar Run is a fantastic website, RIP Adobe Flash. That's what actually got me into computer graphics, is making Flash animations. And you can see on this one, I tagged this as a graphic and the style as cartoon. Still not, I could have maybe even added, like, there's tags for flat style or flat shaded. Some people here recognize Trogdor the Burninator, so yes. And Homestar Runner actually is still releasing new content on YouTube, so definitely check that out. So this is a great example of text to image, but you can actually do something else with these types of image generation tools called Inpainting. So, let's take, for example, this image that I shot. This was a boat tour that I did around the Thousand Islands, which is around like New York State and Canada. And you can actually, wait, that's not the right image. There, that's the image that I took. The lighthouse and the clouds were actually added into this image with Inpainting. So I'll just switch a little bit back and forth here. You can see completely generated. Notice the little Adobe Firefly watermark in the bottom here. You can paint onto specific images and say, I want to add something to this image with a text prompt. In this case, I said a cylindrical lighthouse. And then you can say, how much do I want to preserve the original image, or do I want to add new parts to this image? So this is part of the Adobe Firefly website, as well as Adobe Photoshop. And it's really pretty convincing. It also generates a couple variations. So I had to try a couple different prompts. First, I said a lighthouse, then I said a New England style lighthouse, then I said a cylindrical lighthouse, and that got me closer to, again, what I wanted, as well as the sky. I just kind of said add clouds to the sky. I tried a boat and that really didn't work quite as well. But again, the Adobe, this is a really great implementation. And like Dan mentioned, this is part of the beta version of Photoshop, which is also available to you at BU. Another way you can use Inpainting is to replace the background of an image. So during COVID for Halloween, I went as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat, but it was just me standing in my backyard, right? So what I did was I used Photoshop, and actually Photoshop has another AI-enabled tool called Select Subject, where you can just kind of drag a box and remove the background very easily. And then I typed in a text prompt describing one of the levels from the original Mortal Kombat. So I'm standing on a concrete platform in a room surrounded by green acid, hanging metal chains and windows with bars. And then it, puts me in that environment. And you can see if you look at my feet, it even adds like shadows. So it's kind of estimating the lighting. So I thought this did a really good job, and this showed another way to use these image generators, right? You can take an existing image and add elements to it. Question, is it being built into Photoshop as a new tool? Yes, absolutely. Yes. It literally just creates a new layer with the content that you generate. It just, a text prompt comes up. It's called a generative fill in Adobe Photoshop. Yeah, and this was the best of the variations here. You can also, again, you can change the aspect ratio too of the images that you generate. This one is square, but you could do landscape or portrait, and that will actually change the image entirely. It'll reframe the image based on the aspect ratio. So moving forward with Adobe, they've got this new initiative called Content Authenticity, where they're promoting an open standard for authenticity and provenance. So basically tagging images as generated by AI. And certainly if you generate an image by AI, it'll be in their database. So if you start sharing it around the internet or you try to sell it, they will know that it was generated. Also important to note that at this time, you can't use Firefly for commercial purposes. It's really only kind of just for personal or testing purposes, or maybe memes, right? But as this exits beta and becomes part of the official Photoshop release, I'm sure that they will find a way to do that. They also, I'd like to note this thing at the bottom that made some news articles. They will pay your legal bills, offering full indemnification if you are sued for violating copyright with Firefly generated images. So that's how much they're willing to stand behind that, versus I'm sure you've heard of the many lawsuits coming against some of these other companies on behalf of artists and authors that are saying, you trained this model without my permission, versus, at the very least, Adobe is paying, say what you will about their other business practices, but at least they're paying for the, commercial stock photos, or that was all done above board. One next thing that I like to show off, and I'm going to quickly jump away to a video here, is this new, if you go to firefly.adobe.com, there's some in development tools. It says in exploration, and this is 3D to image. So I'm going to see if I can quickly shift here to this presentation from the Figma conference.
So you've all done the text to image things, and the problem what AI tends to do, generative AI, is it puts everything like smack dab in the middle, which is fine, but like I need to compose stuff around it. Maybe I want to flow some text around something. Well, what we have here is we have this thing where code name is Gingerbread right now, and I have a couple 3D objects. We have a bunch of stuff to choose from, actually. But what this is doing is I can say, everyone's going to happy hour tonight, right? Whiskey glass on a wooden table. And so what this is doing is this is actually taking a look at the depth and the angle and the perspective of the just basic rudimentary object I put on here, and check that out.
So I'll stop it there because I got a lot of other stuff to show you, but it's basically taking a 3D scene. You saw that they kind of put just a cylinder to represent the whiskey glass in the scene, and then it influenced the generation of the image. And then you could reframe the camera or put a couple extra objects in, just kind of basic primitive objects. And you could say this box represents a house and this pyramid represents a pyramid, et cetera, et cetera. So this is really amazing. And if you showed this to me when I was doing like 3D modeling and animation in college, I'd be like, this is fake. Like it doesn't make sense to me. So look out for that. Create a basic 3D scene, and then you can see this representation of a gingerbread castle or a painterly, castle. So stay tuned for that. So you might be thinking, okay, this is all really cool for generating 2D images, but how is this generative AI relevant for virtual reality? a person wearing a virtual reality headset, or a person wearing augmented reality glasses. And this has kind of the synthwave style applied to it. Well, first, let's talk about how are people currently using VR devices. Steam is the world's largest PC video game marketplace. It's where my video game bioentity is currently sold. And if you look at the Steam marketplace, there are other VR apps available. It's actually a pretty large segment of just kind of the VR app marketplace. And if you go and search for tags and you use VR only or VR supported, this 85% here is games. And the rest is, software, downloadable content, demos, videos. So basically a huge portion of this market is for games. And I had a little bit more trouble finding this kind of data for Meta, the MetaQuest Oculus headsets. So I found this website, VRDB, and I again looked for tags. So genre tags. And if you compare genre tags like education, documentary, business, productivity, much fewer tags as opposed to stuff that you would associate with a video game like action, adventure, shooting, puzzle. Now, each game can have multiple tags to it, but essentially the point I'm making with these two slides is that it's mostly games. But the thing to keep in mind is that if you're developing for a VR app for education or for games or even for motion pictures, there's a lot of different steps of this process that are common throughout those things. So this next slide is kind of some of the different aspects of both video game development, but also XR app development, VR, AR app development. So you've got all these different tasks that can each be an individual job in a larger company. Designing concept art, creating the 3D models, creating the audio assets like music, voiceovers, animating the models, the coding, the technical animator, which takes the 3D models and the animation and bridges them together with rigging and skeletons, all the beta testers, and then how do you sell your game? Well, you've got to market it and create a social media campaign. So all of these roles, it's so daunting. And let's say you're a faculty member and you want to create your own VR experience, but you don't have experience with any of these specialized roles. Well, now I'm going to show how AI tools can assist you with taking over these different aspects of building XR experiences. So this last portion of the presentation, I'm going to try to go quickly through a bunch of different tools that I found that are all kind of brand new, amazing, cutting edge stuff that is taking over all these different aspects of development. So one of the most popular role-playing games of all time is the Elder Scrolls series and Skyrim, which came out in 2011. It's sold over 30 million copies and does have a VR version. Within the game, you're on a quest to save the kingdom and you're fighting dragons and collecting gold and going on quests. And in the game, you can have what are called companions. And there's all sorts of a huge modding community around a lot of these games where people build their own aspects of the game. So this mod called Herika, the ChatGPT companion, allows you to quest alongside a character powered by ChatGPT. And I'm going to switch again. I'm going to have to switch a couple more times back to YouTube to show you what Herika is able to do within Skyrim.
Herika, I need you to go and attack those giants, please.
Oh joy, attacking giants. Just what I needed to brighten my day. Watch out, giants, here I come.
This is not scripted dialogue.
Hey Herika, let's take a seat.
Oh, sure thing. I'm glad we're sitting down. It's not like we have a world to save or anything.
Oh, and she goes to sit down. So Herika the dialogue is generated in 5 to 10 seconds with ChatGPT. I should notice that this mod does cost additional money to run. But when I was working on this slide about a month or so ago, I found a different implementation that took about 30 seconds, and the dialogue didn't sound anywhere near as natural. So that's how quickly things are moving. A month later, we have a pretty realistic sounding voice that can do all these different actions. They can interact with other NPCs. She knows where she is, like she'll be saying, we're in Whiterun right now, and I'm talking with this person. She can see your inventory. She can respond to commands. And this is on top of a game that's over 10 years old. Imagine new games developed by these huge billion-dollar studios where you talk to someone just with your microphone and instantaneously they talk back to you. A lot of video game voice actors are really worried about this technology, and rightly so. Another kind of really cool thing is this drag your GAN demo, which is the ability to kind of reframe and adjust images generated by AI. And it's important to know that each of these images you see here is like its own model. So it's not like you could just take, any stable diffusion image and quickly reframe it. But you'll notice what it's doing here is you're kind of placing points. And as you drag the points around, it completely changes and reframes the image. So this type of technology, imagine if this was integrated onto something like Adobe Firefly. You could generate your image and then drag, I want to make the car smaller. I want to make the house further in the distance. Just an example of where this might go. And this is just in the context of images. But what if you wanted to generate video? Well, there's a lot of research projects and stuff coming out. I've got a couple that I'll highlight quickly here. Align Your Latents, which is by NVIDIA. So let's say you want a video of two pandas discussing an academic paper. Quite like this one here. And then a stormtrooper vacuuming the beach. So you can see this one, they are using some copyrighted content, right? And there's some other examples if you click through in this website. Another one that looks really, really interesting to me is Runway AI Magic Tools, which is, again, text to video. So I slowed down this video so you can see it a little bit better, but the text is in the middle there, and then the generated video is there too. So this is like a commercial tool, but there's a lot of other really crazy things you can do with video too, with these types of toolkits. My colleague, Scott, was playing around with these. So you can turn an image sequence into an animated video. You can remove people from video. So like that Inpainting you saw me do where I was adding a lighthouse, you could say maybe remove this person from a video, adjust depth of field, or let's say you shot a video and you say, I want to change the background, but I didn't shoot it on a green screen. You could actually just remove the background without a green screen. And that's just a small section of, there's like a dozen different things that this can do. Question, if Adobe is trying to build this into their video platform, absolutely. The beta version of Premiere Pro is starting to introduce features like these, where you could say, do AI-based color grading. And Adobe is much more conservative in how slowly they move things out because they're a much larger company, right? And they want actual professionals to be able to use these tools like right now versus some of these other, like, you saw this video. This video looks pretty good, but it's not production quality. And you're not going to see this kind of tool used yet for feature films, but check back in a year and very well, you could have just people typing in text prompts to generate plates for video. Creative Reality ID Studio. You may have seen, this allows you to create realistic human avatars. So you may have seen some of these like meme videos on YouTube. Basically what you could do is you could use Midjourney to generate images and then animate those images, as well as you could use pre-built avatars. And with their new version, actually, you don't even have to go through Midjourney. You could just do kind of type in text, and then you could just type in text to generate these avatars. But I like to showcase this video because I think it's pretty funny. So again, we'll switch back out here. This is Star Wars, but in Germany.
Lukas, ich bin dein Vater.
There's a whole bunch of these. You may have seen Harry Potter, Balenciaga by the same artist.
Furcht ist der Pfad zur dunklen Seite. Furcht führt zu Wut, Wut führt zu Hass, Hass führt zu unsäglichem Leid.
I'll stop there, but it also does text synthesis as well. So you could have it maybe speaking like Walter White, but in German. You can feed that into this tool. So still very robotic, but again, this is early days with this type of technology. These are called neural radiance fields. I'll play through this image here, but basically, I've tried to understand how to explain this a little bit better. So using machine learning, an object or scene is encoded into a neural network of 2D images. So if you watch this playthrough, this was just from still images, but it's created a 3D scene. And actually, if you watch this on YouTube, you could actually, at each point in the video, you could spin around in 360 view. I'm just not able to do that in PowerPoint. But you can see here that this is generated. So see, the laptop is a little wonky. It stores an entire 3D scene as a neural network, and it's using math to predict at each point of the model how light should reflect off of it. It's much faster and requires fewer images to train than photogrammetry. But the difference is, if you want to actually deform and animate these 3D models, you lose the advantages of this. But I mean, this is an unbelievable technology where, using AI, you can generate these really, really realistic scenes. And I've even seen demos where 3D Google Maps Street View data was used to create a 3D environment of entire cities. So stay tuned for more about neural radiance fields. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening with this. And then check out this video if you want to learn more about this technology from the Corridor crew. Really good implementation of how this might work with motion graphics and how like a movie studio or a video game studio might use this. One of the last ones I have here is you could do 3D models from a text prompt. So OpenAI has one called Shape, and I even generated my own here, a Boston Terrier. So it generates these little spinning animated GIFs or GIFs here. So you could type in a Boston Terrier, or a donut with pink icing, or an airplane that looks like a banana, and it will generate this 3D model. Now, again, it's really rough. There's not a lot of detail, but there is color and detail in here. And again, there's other tools that can do this a little bit better, but it's still very beta, alpha, very early. This one I was actually able to generate on my own. I didn't even have to install anything. I used what's called a Google Colab notebook to generate this one. But yeah, you can generate a 3D model. So you can imagine the same capabilities of Firefly, but generating 3D models. So again, that's another thing that I learned how to do in college, and now apparently an AI can just we'll be able to do it in probably about a couple months. So going back to the old slide that I showed you, right, all those different aspects of extended reality or video game development. Well, now look at all these AI tools you can use for all these different parts of this process. And I haven't even gone over some of these, like character rigging was always the hardest part of this process, where you have to create this internal skeleton inside a 3D model and then tell the model, okay, this part of the model controls this bone, and this bone is connected to this bone, and creating all the controls. This is a whole, it was just so annoying and took so long. And then I'm like, I wonder if an AI can do that. Yep. Just AI does all that automatically. And then some other interesting stuff around audio, right? You could use Music Gen, which is by Meta, to generate your own music. Or you could use Adobe Podcast AI. If you don't have a video recording studio, or an audio recording studio, you could kind of make a home recording, and then it'll just kind of clean up your voice to sound more like a podcast. So just a ton of new technologies coming in. And with each one of these, it lowers the barrier to entry, right? So less work for you as more of the work is done by AI, but then of course leads to the question of, well, does that mean less artists and less programmers are doing this work? And that's beyond my purview as an educational technologist. But the last thing I'd like to highlight is kind of what is the future of experiencing some of these new technologies. And you've probably heard about the Apple Vision Pro, the quote unquote most advanced personal electronic device ever made. A lot of amazing things that it claims to be able to do, like record 3D movies, transition between AR and VR seamlessly, control it with eye tracking and gesture tracking. Leads to a question: how could AI enhance reality on an AR headset like the Apple Vision Pro using some of these AI-enabled experiences? Perhaps it could automatically translate to and from any language, suggest witty replies, or maybe replace your voice entirely with ChatGPT, completely change how your environment looks to you, redecorate your house or live anywhere you want, beachside property, even if you don't live anywhere near the beach. You could 3D scan and insert yourself into custom video game, movies, or TV shows. There's a certain episode of the newest season of Black Mirror, which is pretty relevant to that concept of personalized entertainment. You could alter someone's physical appearance, voice, or entire identity. These last ones get to kind of a scary cyberpunk reality of changing someone's appearance, or personalized advertisements. As you walk around the world, the advertisements you see are personalized to you. So some scary kind of implementations of this technology, but I have to imagine it's coming, and not everyone is going to make everything, not everything is going to be curated in the same way Adobe does, right? There's a lot of great benefits to using, not having those safeguards. You can have all sorts of, your favorite cartoon or Marvel characters in any kind of game you want, but then there are also a lot of ethical issues with not having those safeguards as well. So this is reaching the end of my presentation. Thank you all. I'd like to end here with a discussion. My questions to you are you interested in using some of these image generation or machine learning tools in your work, your teaching, your research? Which ones are you interested in? Do these tools, will they make it easier for you to build your own XR experiences? Do you feel like it's closer, or is the barrier to entry still high? And do you have any other questions about them?
Hi, Jack. I had a question about using tools like Stable Diffusion, because I've dabbled with it, but it's so resource intensive. It really depends on having like a high spec GPU. And so I was wondering if you knew of resources at the university where people might be able to use like a virtualized instance or something in order to run tools like this, these sort of hardware dependent tools.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. If you're not using, a web-based tool, which, like I mentioned, you're at the beck and call of their servers. And if their server goes down and you need to use it, that could be difficult to implementing it into an assignment. I know there is, high computing cluster. I forget the name of the BU computing cluster. Be great to see if there are, say, people in the computer science department or other departments that are using some of BU's own computing power to do that, as opposed to, kind of having your own workstation. I think that's a great question and worth looking into. I know that those kind of resources exist, but yes, that is a thing. As with VR, you need like a lot of processing power to run it. And but there are many of these things, like I mentioned. That's why I focused on Firefly versus like Stable Diffusion, because it's so much harder to install, as you've probably seen on your computer. Like you need a whole series of scripts to install, and it's easier to run something on a website.
But the wonderful thing about these about especially the open source tools is that they're modular and really extensible. You can do a lot with these different models because they're all these different plugins and extra tools being developed all the time that bolt on.
Yeah, exactly. New models coming out, and it's really hard to keep up. So yeah, really, really great question there. Andrew, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Jack, for this very wonderful presentation. My question, I guess, relates to that question you posed to the faculty, whether they're interested to use this. I don't know if you looked into like the policy behind using this in an educational institution, because already, there are several layers already of, intellectual property behind it from the artist side, and on the educational institution side, if faculty were to use this, who will own the IP of that image or video? Yeah, I'm curious if you were able to look into that, because already I'm trying to think of like an analog of this, which is the learning materials that we use already, and say as you're already aware, right? We upload, or faculty upload, these images from, let's say, publications that we already subscribe to, but there's still limitation to what they can use and not use, or disseminate to students. So I was wondering if you were able to look into that, if educational institutions, specifically higher ed, are picking this up as a technology, or are they kind of wary of using it because of, it's exposing them to maybe, I don't know, lawsuits?
Yeah.
Or probably there are other industries to look at, maybe for some good practices when it comes to using it.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and definitely good to be wary, especially with AI tools that were trained on copyrighted content. I think Adobe's approach, again, with this authenticity content, their new initiative where they're essentially tagging content as generated by AI. They have a lot of big institutions that are signed on to that. You've got hardware manufacturers as well as newspapers like the New York Times, that are signing on to this idea of authenticity, because I'm sure they're kind of worried about these same issues as well. So that, at a very minimum, any content generated about this, you should mention that it was generated with Adobe Firefly. And you saw that many of the images had a little watermark in the bottom, and that this isn't currently available for commercial use. But legal issues, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really get into the legality as much, but the fact that this is trained on stock photos that are commercially licensed, that Adobe owns, and are being correctly tagged as generated by AI, really for me, makes me feel more comfortable in recommending people generate these kinds of images. I mean, it's great to have like a policy for that. And I think even images that were trained on copyright content, it's still a question of, is this a transformative work under fair use? And certainly people with much more understanding than I of fair use and copyright law could answer that question. But the fact that these are great questions to come up with, and that any kind of policy around the use of, say, large language models should also maybe include the use of image generation models. Couple questions here from Lisa. Is there a concern that these tools are behind paywalls, leading to barriers for student use in classes? Absolutely. And that's why I've tried to focus more on free tools like Firefly, which is free and part of our own BU license. And, Midjourney is not free, and DALL-E is not free, and Stable Diffusion is free. But again, those kind of ethical and legal concerns are present. I think Adobe is actually free for anyone with an Adobe account. I actually started to use Adobe Firefly before it was available like more openly, because I requested with a different Adobe account that I had, like a personal Adobe account. It was at that time, which was some months ago, it was like, fill out this form and we'll grant you access. And then I was using that account. And then at some point I just said, why don't I just try my BU account? And it started working. So it is now at this point in beta and available for people at BU. I don't even think you need to pay for a Creative Cloud license.
Yeah, it's in their you're correct. It's in their Express now too, in the Adobe Express.
Yeah, which is another
fonts,
kind of free
like
tool.
descriptive fonts, a font developer, and that type of thing.
Yeah. And if it's in beta and part of Adobe Express, I should say only a Google Chrome browser for Adobe Express. I wasn't able to get Firefox working with it. But if it's part of Adobe Express, you don't need to pay for Creative Cloud to use Adobe Express, and it's in there as well. Yes, another question.
Oops, sorry, I lost my camera. I actually have two questions. One is for the, I think you called it NERF, where you take the images and you make the videos out of that. I could spontaneously see an application for some of the promotional videos that we've been thinking of generating for our programs, or for the medical campus, for virtual campus tours for student recruitment, for example. So are these tools available, or do we have the processing power somewhere to run them? Because I would suspect that this is beyond what a laptop can do.
Yeah, so NERF is a very new technology, even much newer than these image generation technologies. Luma AI is the company that seems to be the most accessible commercially. and there are like free kind of trial versions of that. I haven't looked as far into the pricing as such, but if you go to, so go back in the presentation here to the this video by Corridor Crew. Again, I will share all of this with you. This is not that long, maybe about 10-15 minutes long. This has a great overview of that because this is a channel where it's all visual effects artists. And so with that, they're using these kinds of tools. Yes, exactly like what you're saying. You could take 360 images and stitch together this kind of 3D walkthrough as a video, and this can also be embedded into a website. And ultimately, I see this being a really powerful tool. Because this is just an MP4 video that was embedded in a website. So they have kind of some examples on their website as well of stuff. But I don't know. I need to kind of practice this much more. Yes, real estate tours is essentially. You've probably seen some of this. And now this is like the next level of that. So really, really cool. This is going to really blow up in terms of, computationally, even as I've been looking at it, it's gotten less and less computationally. It's taken less time to generate these kinds of images. So this is definitely going to enter the video game industry, the VFX industry, and the real estate industry as well. So yeah, the Luma AI is the company to look at for this tool. But again, important caveat that a lot of these new tools are not free or are not officially BU supported tools. So I can't guarantee at all that we'll be able to support anything like these without, going through the, sourcing and procurement process, especially for something as important as, campus tours. Like there's a lot of whole other logistical issues around that.
And my second question is a little bit more on the dark side. I imagine, I imagine some of the kind of like the image manipulation that you showed. Yeah. And the way you describe it, it becomes easier and easier to really just select an area and have it do what you want. And a lot of the research data in biomedical science is all digital files. It's images that are coded. How can we make sure that nobody goes in and, I don't know, deletes something from an image they don't want to see or manipulates the image in a way that does not correctly represent the actual data?
A great question, and it's going to become a really, really serious issue of image authenticity. And we're finding how difficult it is to even determine now if an image was generated by AI. A lot of the same tools that can generate an image can discern if an image was generated by AI. But as the gulf between real and fake becomes smaller and smaller, I think in the medical context, obviously patient privacy and the data handling of those kinds of files has always been important, but I think it's going to become even more important. It's almost like when you think about evidence collected at a crime scene, they have this term, the chain of command, the digital chain of command, right? Like from when a scan was captured to when someone looks at it. Maybe we don't even want to send files to people. Maybe you don't want to send a ultrasound photo to a patient. Maybe you just display it to them on screen. But this is going to start popping up all over the place. How do we handle images, and what do we do if kind of the lines of reality and fake are so blurry? And with scientific and medical data, it's kind of a nightmare. Again,
have you heard anything of kind of like funding agencies or publication journals kind of like coming out with rules or guidelines or expectations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure that stuff like that is popping up. As you probably know, sometimes the lag between, the need to regulate some of this stuff and then institutional or political action takes many years. And this technology is moving at such a pace that, the political gridlock in Washington or the institutional gridlock at, these large journals might take so long to even come up with standards that already people are trying to fake, scientific data. So I think having like provenance And maybe when you publish images now, you'll have to show proof that they are real in a way where now there's a certain, amount of trust, where we trust that something was free. Yeah, interesting concept here, Dan, with the use of the blockchain. Yeah, maybe there'll have to be some kind of digital receipt that something was real or fake. And yeah, the policies are becoming outdated, even faster than I can even talk about them. Like I said, I create a slide and then I'm like, oh, this technology has now supplanted this old technology from 2 months ago. So some really, really great and scary ethical questions about the future, especially when it comes to someone's license, and someone's image, and artists' work. And a lot of those images are, a lot of those issues are currently why the writers and actors in Hollywood are on strike, because studios just want to create a 3D representation of your performances, and then own that in perpetuity. So yeah, a lot of great stuff here. Wendell, you shared a link here. What is this link here that you shared in the chat?
That's image authentication.
Great. Yeah, those types of technologies are going to become more and more important as this continues to become adopted, and as these tools become better and better. Thank you for that.